President Trump is maintaining that there was no wrongdoing on his part in his phone call with the president of Ukraine. The doubling down comes after a summary of that phone call was released just yesterday. Paula Reid has more.
I didn't do it. You take a look at that call. It was perfect.
President Trump defended his conversation with the president of Ukraine and issued a new call for transparency.
I fully support transparency on the so-called whistleblower information.
But in a meandering press conference, he deflected when pressed if it was okay for an American president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival.
Democrats did this hoax during the United Nations week. It was perfect.
But throughout a busy week at the UN, the president took every opportunity to spread unsubstantiated claims and attack his political enemies.
Joe Biden and his son are corrupt. It's the worst witch hunt in political history.
During their meeting Wednesday, the Ukrainian president came to Mr. Trump's defense.
Nobody pushed me, yes.
In other words, no pressure.
But Democrats argued the power imbalance was implicit. According to a summary of the call, after the Ukrainian leader brought up U.S. defense spending, Mr. Trump told him, "I would like you to do us a favor." He asked his counterpart to find out what happened with CrowdStrike, the company hired to investigate the Russian hacking of the DNC servers. He also asked the Ukrainian leader to look into former Vice President Joe Biden and his son.
If you're a Democrat, you have automatic protection.
No evidence has yet emerged that former Vice President Joe Biden or his son Hunter did anything illegal.
It's such a blatant abuse of power.
Last night, Biden made his strongest comments yet on impeachment.
It seems to me it's awful hard to avoid the conclusion that it is an impeachable offense and a violation of constitutional responsibility.
So here to help us make sense of all of this is former Assistant U.S. Attorney Keir Dougall. Keir is also a CBSN legal contributor.
Good morning.
All right, good morning. So ahead of this hearing, we've heard a lot really in the last 8 or 9 hours or so. Overnight, we found out that the whistleblower complaint had been declassified, but we haven't seen it yet. Some lawmakers have. What is standing out the most to you?
Look, I think the lead here is still the main headline, which is in the summary and the request for a favor by President Trump. I think we may be missing the forest for the trees a little bit here. Look, I think we just heard Vice President Biden say the real issue is an abuse of trust and an abuse of power. And I think that's really the core. When you're talking about quid pro quo or pressure, you're asking, well, was that abuse of power, did it occur through a bribery with a quid pro quo? Did it occur through an extortion, through a threat, or through pressure? I think these are questions that, may make for nice law school exam questions, but I don't think they're getting at the heart of what the real problem here is, which is the country expects free and fair elections that are not dependent upon it, that aren't interfered with by foreign powers. We don't want to be told what we should think. Okay, we want to make up our own minds. And that is at the core of what I think President Trump's request gets at. Sort of secondarily, the sort of secondary thing here is part of the core of our democracy. One of the pillars of it is that we have independent law enforcement. And so when as a former prosecutor, I'm alarmed when I hear the president say, well, you should investigate one of my political rivals. Right? That's problematic enough. But to then have President Trump effectively exporting that, that model out to Ukraine, going to the president of the Ukraine and saying, by the way, Mr. President, you should put your thumb on the scale of your law enforcement agencies, and you should, direct them to look at particular people or individuals. These are very problematic. They are really a core problem, a core attack, a corrupt attack on our democratic institutions. And so I think, as Alexander Hamilton wrote at the time of the framing of the Constitution, when they imported the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors into the Constitution, the issue wasn't about necessarily a specific crime, because what was a crime 240 years ago is different from what are crimes now. Right? What they were talking about was an abuse of the public trust, something that hurts our society and our country. And so threatening the independence of our law enforcement, that hurts us. Threatening our elections, threatening the free and fairness of our elections, That's the real problem here.
So, you know, the president will say, hey, listen, my concern was about corruption, right, and whether or not there was corruption that involved the Bidens. But he asks the president of Ukraine to look into it. He doesn't ask the DOJ, or you know, maybe I'll ask you, you know, how does one go about having an American investigated if one believes that they're doing something illegal in another country? Don't you contact the DOJ?
Well, look, in a perfect world, right, the Department of Justice, who would receive tips, would learn about this stuff, and would act independently, would act without fear or favor, without you know, putting a thumb on, well, this is a political opponent, this is somebody who, you know, we can help our boss by investigating. It's done independently. And so when the president in particular is asking for an investigation of a potential political rival, it rings all of the alarm bells that should be ringing. And so I find it hard to swallow the notion that, oh, these are just two presidents taking anti-corruption efforts. In fact, what's occurring underneath this is an effort to corrupt the pillars of democracy of two countries, right? So we understand there was a prosecutor in, you know, there are, of course, prosecutors in Ukraine. They investigated, did whatever they did with respect to the Bidens there. According to the reports that I've read, there was no wrongdoing found. That ought to be the end of it, at least in a perfect world, and assuming that the prosecutor was doing their job appropriately.
Right. All right, Keir, I have like so many other questions to ask you. You're sticking around, right?
I will if you want.
Okay, well, hopefully we get a chance to talk to you a little bit later on in the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.